Let's take a look at the Singer Stitch Gauge and Guide tool. First, let's see what comes in the package. In the package, you will receive two pieces, the seam gauge and the seam guide. You will use the gauge to decide which seam allowance you want to set your guide at for your sewing project. It also includes full instructions on how to position the seam gauge and then the seam guide onto your machine. The Singer seam gauge comes with 8 different seam allowances. Check your pattern or tutorial for the specific seam allowance before starting a project. The 8 seam allowances included in the seam gauge are 1/8 inch seam allowance, which is perfect for edge stitching or basting stitch. A scant 1/4 inch, which is great for quilting, especially detailed piecing. A 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is the standard seam allowance for quilting. 3/8 inch seam allowance is great for curves or circles, such as arm or neck holes on garments. 1/2 inch seam allowance is great for thicker fabrics, such as flannel or denim. 5/8 inch seam allowance is the standard for sewing apparel. 3/4 inch seam allowance is perfect for more secure seams for when you're doing a double stitch, or if you have a project you would like to have a frayed edge on. And 1 inch seam allowance is perfect for those heavy duty projects such as drapes or upholstery. Let's go over to the sewing machine and set it up. To position the guide in place, start with the gauge and slide the gauge under the presser foot. Position the needle above the desired seam width hole. Lower the needle into the hole, making sure the tool is parallel with the lines on the throat plate. Place the presser foot down to hold the gauge in place. There's an indent that fits your finger to help remove the tool. This indent should be towards the front of the machine. Remove the protective backing from the guide and set the paper aside. Do not throw the paper backing away, as you will use it to recover the adhesive when storing the tool. Align the guide, butting it up along the edge of the gauge, and press into place on the top of the machine. Raise the presser foot and needle to remove the gauge, leaving the guide behind to begin sewing the desired seam allowance. Place the 2 layers of fabric under your presser foot, aligning the straight edge of the fabric against the guide. Lower the presser foot and sew. Keep the fabric even and up against the guide as you sew. Once you're finished sewing, take your piece out of the machine and cut it loose. With the use of the Singer seam guide, you're able to achieve straight and even seams every time. Once you're done using the seam guide, slide your finger under the tool at the indent and lift up. This will help you release the guide from the machine. If over time the adhesive has a lint buildup, spray with a little glass cleaner and gently rub the linty area with your thumb. The lint will rise to the surface. Rinse the debris away with warm water and let it air dry. Now it is ready for reuse. To store your tool, go ahead and reapply the paper to the adhesive on the back and press in place. Now you are ready to store your seam gauge and guide until the next use. Here are some other ways you can use the seam gauge and guide tool: pattern making, tailoring, and hemming. This tool is available for purchase at select stores and online.